Good afternoon, everyone. Letting folks into our afternoon event today with Dara Saville and Cheo Torres. We are excited to talk about some of our indigenous herbal plants and medicines of the Southwest. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to learn some stuff. I'm a big plant lover myself, so I'm happy to be here. My name is Amanda. I'm the Events and Marketing Director for Bookworks. Bookworks is a 36-year-old independent bookstore in the beautiful Rio Grande River Valley of North Albuquerque. If you're not from Albuquerque, we hope you'll come in and see us one day. If you are from Albuquerque, let me tell you a little bit about our service. We're hoping to open up very soon, within the next month or two here, as we get COVID-safe practices in place. We are going to be reconfiguring our store, which, as you can imagine, looks much different than it did a year ago. So let us get some stuff together and we'll be able to welcome you back in for browsing soon. Until then, you can order books from our website, which is our name without the O's, bkwrks.com. I will put the link to Dara's book in the chat. We hope that you can support our local bookstore so we can continue doing great events like this. I want to remind you that Jeff Bezos does not need your money. He doesn't even want to be part of Amazon now himself. He's so rich. So please help support your local businesses. When you spend money in your community, 75% of your dollar goes right back into your city. Please remember to shop Albuquerque's local businesses, especially now as we come out of this really tough financial time for everyone. When you order books on our website, you can come pick them up at our store. We are open 4 days a week for curbside service, 10 to 2 on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and 2 to 6 on Wednesday. Like I said, we'll be opening soon. Please stay tuned to our social media and our website to learn more. We are going to have a great conversation here. If you have any questions that come up while we're chatting, you can type those into the chat. And at the end, we'll have a question and answer with Dara Saville, and I'm sure Cheo can answer questions for you too. I can also call on you during the question and answer if you want to raise your hand. So think about what you want to learn and find out from these authors. After they speak, we will be able to do that. Okay, I think we've got everybody in now. I'm sure more will join us. Let me tell you a little bit about Dara. She is the founder and primary instructor at Albuquerque Herbalism and the executive director of the Yerba Mansa project. She is longtime and lifetime focused on ecological restoration of the Middle Rio Grande. Alicio Cheo Torres, I've known for a while now from his books from the University of New Mexico Press. As many of you know, Cheo is a vice administrator at the University of New Mexico. He has taught classes on curanderismo there for decades, taking students to Mexico and all around the Southwest. And he's the author of numerous books himself, several from the University of New Mexico Press, and hopefully some forthcoming works too. So I will drop links into the chat for both of these authors. And meanwhile, I would just like to welcome all of you and welcome Dara and welcome Cheo. Thank you to both for being here today.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And thanks so much, Bookworks, for hosting this event. I hope everyone has gotten their book from Bookworks. I did spend a lot of time sitting out front signing all the books. So if you want a signed book, Bookworks is the way to go.
Excellent. All right, do you two want to launch into it and talk to each other a little bit, inform us a little bit more about some of these herbs and plants in the book?
We'll be glad to, Amanda. Amanda, right. Let me thank you for everything that you do for the community and what you did at UNM when you were here, and now what you do in the Rio Grande Valley, and how many people's lives you touch. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to your biography of Dara. Dara is all the things that you mentioned, but the most important thing, I think, is she's passion for native plants. So that is a passion that she has, and she'll have for the rest of her life. And Dara, I've had some questions after reading your excellent book. that I'd like to ask. There are 6 questions. And the first one is that you're a geographer, you're a community engagement person, that's your passion. But what motivated you to write the book or your book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine?
Well, thanks, Cheo, for being here with me today. I really appreciate your company. Well, I must say that, my very first thought in getting started with this book was that I really wanted to honor my mentor, Dr. Jerry Williams. He's had some health problems over the years, and I thought, well, now is the time to write this book that I've been thinking about for a long time. So he was the sort of the catalyst for getting started, and I did dedicate the book to Jerry. He was my graduate advisor at the University of New Mexico in the Geography and Environmental Studies department. And then as far as writing the book, the content and the process, I was really motivated by a few things. One was personal, and that is largely that plants and knowing the land around me has brought me a lot of joy in life. A lot of health and well-being springs forth from that relationship for me. And I thought, I really just want to share that with other people. I want other people to feel as good as I do. And for me, that has a lot to do with plants and knowing the land around me. And if I could help other people to discover that for themselves and to make that connection, then I felt sure that other people would enjoy their lives more. And so that was part of it. And on a more practical level, I was really motivated to just help people to have a collected source of information about New Mexico, about the Southwest, and about the Western states in general. Even though the stories I tell in the book are New Mexico centric, they are pertinent and relatable to a much wider geographic range. And many of the plants in the book do have a wide geographic range as well, or closely related species that are ranging across the Western states and Plain states. And so I wanted to collect all the information about these plants in one place and to tell stories about ecological change so that people could get a better understanding of all the changes that are happening in the world and what those changes might mean, especially for plants that we rely on as herbal practitioners and plants that we just rely on for biodiversity and for enjoyment's sake when we're hiking, just for fun and wherever we're going. So there was a real drive to collect information in one place so that people would have a good reference book as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dara. Dara, the second question is, first, Amanda, in her introduction of you, mentioned the Yerba Mansa project, that you were the director. What is the Yerba Mansa project? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd love to. Thanks for asking. I started that project 7 years ago now. I am a lover of wild places, and I, always thought of the Bosque as a place where I could go to feel good and to restore myself and lift my spirit. And the more I learned about the consequences of our land and water use, the more I felt differently walking in that place. I couldn't get out of my head. And I became aware of changes that were taking place and things that we were losing in the world. And I could see that happening in the Bosque, and I felt very moved by that. And I didn't want to stand by and just watch that happen without doing something that I could do. And so I felt the guidance of cottonwoods. Cottonwoods are central to our biological and cultural realities here in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. And they are the nurturers of life in the Bosque. They are a keystone species who provide the structure of the forest. And they have a very maternal quality to them, being the matriarchs of that ecosystem. And knowing that they are senescing and their influence in that environment was waning, I felt an obligation to carry on the call of the Cottonwoods and to help to nurture this environment in their spirit and in their honor. And when I started thinking about why I would do it and how I would do it, I thought, well, this has to be a community project. It has to be something that the whole community wants to do. And how could I make it so that it would serve the whole community and excite everyone and bring everyone into the bosque to work on its behalf and to enjoy it. And originally, being an herbalist and an herbal educator in the community, I thought this would be a great opportunity for herbal students to think about and engage in an actual reciprocal relationship. You know, as herbalists, we think a lot about what plants can do for us and how we can use plants for our own purposes. But I really wanted to drive home the point that working with plants or loving nature or just being a person in the world, we need to take responsibility for the health of our environment, our ecosystems, our habitats, our plants. And the Yerba Mansa project became an opportunity not just for herb students, but for the whole community to reclaim their responsibility to care for the bosque, to care for the floodplain, to care for the plants and all the life that lives there. And I was very thrilled that the project very quickly outgrew my initial idea and became a very widely supported project here in Albuquerque. And we've had a lot of great bosque restoration field days with a lot of community members participating, and we've gotten a lot of local partnerships to help support it as well. And so we're eager to return to that work in September. I hope people will join us for our next bosque restoration field day, which we're planning for September. Hopefully we can gather again in larger numbers by then.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you. The third question is about the foreword in your book. Jesse Wolf Hardin wrote an excellent foreword in your book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine, and I was impressed with that. Tell us about him. I don't know how many people know him.
Yeah, Jesse is the co-director of Plant Healer Publications and Events, along with his wife, Kiva. And they live in a very remote and inaccessible area. I can guarantee that is true. I have visited them. It's not easy to get there. And so they live way out in the Gila wilderness. And Jesse is, you know, he's someone who has been very inspiring to me and very encouraging to me. He has an incredible level of devotion to the land that he loves. He has dedicated his whole life to caring for and restoring the land that he loves. And so that was a very inspiring model for me. And I drew a lot of my own inspiration from his dedicated work and service. And then further beyond that, he, for the last decade, has been a friend who has encouraged me to write and develop my own thoughts and ideas. And that encouragement has been really important to me and was a critical component to me writing this book, which was derived from you know, writings over the years that I reformatted into this book. And of course, a lot of original writings went into this book as well. But, you know, to have someone who is willing to devote their life to caring for and restoring land was something that I hadn't seen at that level in anyone I knew personally. So I'm grateful for his influence in my life.
Oh, thank you. He seems like a very colorful person and a person with a good heart. A person who wants to help others. So thank you for that description. The fourth question is, in your book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine, you divide it into two parts. Part one is the changing world, and part two is knowing the plants. Briefly, what can a reader gain from each of those parts of your book?
Well, the first part is about knowing the land, and the second part is about knowing the plants, and those things really go together. The first introductory chapters are designed to help the reader learn about the land and ecosystems in the Southwest and in the Western states of the United States. And many of the ecological processes that I described there and the landscape changes that I described in those chapters are things that are occurring in other bioregions around the world. And the purpose of those introductory chapters is to help people to understand how the land has changed, how we've gotten to where we are, and to begin to imagine where we might be headed. And also to learn how to make relationships with land and plants. To me, that makes perfect sense. It doesn't to everyone. And so I provide examples, personal examples of how I've done that. I've also told stories about how those relationships have changed my life, and how I've learned a lot about the world and about humanity through those connections. And so I hope that those examples will help people to embrace where they live at a deeper, more meaningful level, and to learn not just about plants and land, but to learn about themselves and humanity by those relationships and the wisdom and the happiness that we can get through those connections. And so I tell a lot of botanical ecological stories as ways of expressing this information. And again, even though the stories take place in the Southwest, they are relevant to other regions as well. And that's really what the first chapters are about. And then the second part of the book is Materia Medica. And Materia Medica is, in-depth plant profiles. And in writing that part of the book, I thought to myself, as a plant practitioner, as an herbalist, what did I really want to put out there that I didn't see out there already? And for me, being a geographer, an interdisciplinary approach to whatever I'm learning about just makes sense to me. I'm a big picture kind of person. So I like to take all of the very specialized study and work and observations of others and put them together like puzzle pieces to create a broader understanding of plants. And so the Materia Medica goes into detail about 39 different plant species, including trees and herbaceous plants, natives, non-natives, invasive species as well. I tried to cover the full gamut, and I really wanted to show our lineage of knowledge. And I included a lot of different kinds of information because there's a lot of different ways of understanding the world. And when we put those things together, we really can have this bigger picture that I feel is so important. And so the Materia Medica describes plants in detail by discussing their ecological roles and why they're important to just exist in the world, doing their own work every day as living beings. I also talk about history and mythological stories. I talk about ancestral connections. I talk about the long history of uses by indigenous people within the ranges of all of these plants, as much as we know about that. I talk about modern herbal uses and also my own personal experience with the plants. And so I hope that all of that together gives people a multitude of ways of understanding and appreciating plants, because some people like stories, some people like factual information, some people engage on the sensory and emotional level, and some people really just want to learn factual information. So I hope I included all of that in there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Dara, I'd like to emphasize on the part 2. That impressed me. Also, of course, part 1. And you list, as you mentioned, 39 medicinal plants and alphabetized by their botanical name and common name or names, as many of them in Spanish also, with the plant traditions, the history of the plant, the medicinal usage of the plant, and the research summary of each plant, which was excellent. And that's something that lacks on many of these plants. You also photographed each plant. I think you were the sole photographer for all of these plants. They were excellent photographs. why did you select these plants, and which ones are the widely used in New Mexico? If you can just mention some of them.
Yeah. Well, it was hard to narrow the list down. I was already over my page limit, so I couldn't do everything. But I really just felt like I wanted to include a mixture of plants, as I mentioned earlier, both natives and non-natives, plants from that have different species around the world, plants that have a lot of rich history associated with them, and also invasive species. I have a special section on non-native invasive species because I really want to encourage the use of those. Just briefly about that specifically, I think that a lot of people have a lot of conflicting and controversial views about non-native invasive species. And as a person who has worked in restoration and conservation for most of my adult life, I have my own conflicted feelings about those particular species. But as an herbalist, I feel it's important for us to embrace those because they're very abundant in the landscape, and our usage of those as herbal medicines can help us to protect more sensitive native plant populations. And so that was important for me to give them a special space in the book, so that we could start that conversation and start working through our own emotional baggage about the plants. That is something important for herbalists to do. So the rest of the plants in general, and I did photograph all of those plants. Many of those photographs have been, I've been collecting them for years. And so it was really nice to finally have something to do with all those photos. The Materia Medica really is a collection of plants that I felt represented herbalism in the Southwest. And as I described the different elements of the Materia Medica, ranging from history and ecological information to modern botanical information, and as you mentioned, also a research summary for all of the plants. Some of it was brief, depending on how much research there was. Some of it was quite lengthy. That was something that I always wish I had access to in other herbal books, was the ability to say, hey, that tidbit of information is really interesting. I'd like to know more about that. Well, now there are citations in my book where you can follow the trail of information about whatever part interests you. And so that was something I did spend a lot of time on, providing that kind of information so that more serious practitioners or clinical herbalists would be able to follow the trail of information and learn about whatever aspect of the plant was interesting to them. And the collection of plants really, I thought about what are the plants that are most important ecologically in the Southwest, and what are the plants that are most important culturally in the Southwest. And there's many more that could have been included, but I felt these were the top on my list. And anyone who didn't make the list can find a spot in my next book. But there are so many really important plants. And, in New Mexico in particular, we have a very long and layered history of people's relationships with plants. I think living in New Mexico, being an herbalist, is just outstanding because we have a very rich, layered, and continuing herbal tradition that isn't present in a lot of areas of the country, because that has been passed down and it has been really valued, and it still is today. And so it's a living tradition that I really wanted to honor by choosing plants that really represent us biologically and culturally, and to help people realize that this is really one of the most important parts of our heritage and our inheritance, and what we can pass on to future generations is healthy land, healthy plant habitats, and intact native plant communities. And so the Materia Medica includes plants that I felt just really characterized the Southwest biologically and culturally. And I also wanted to tell stories about plants that moved me personally. And so all of the plants in the Materia Medica are plants that I have relationships with personally, plants that have helped me to become a better person and to appreciate the place where I live. And they also feature very prominently in my home apothecary, and plants that I think I want to encourage people to work with because they're common, or I want to encourage people to learn about them because they have threats that people should be aware of, so that we can, as herbalists or as naturalists or just as hikers, we can be aware of threats to plants, and we can do our part to play a positive role in their existence in this world. And so I think there were a lot of reasons for including these plants, but that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, I was impressed with the list because these are plants that are really popular in New Mexico, most of them. I wrote a list of them, but you had arnica, sage, of course, Yerba Mansa, ocotillo, horehound, bee balm, pinon, globe mallow, on and on. So thank you for selecting that list. It was excellent. Before I ask you the last question, let me thank you personally for being an herbal guide during my summer class. You did an excellent job. The students loved you. We went to the botanical garden, and there's a curandera garden there. And not only did you spend time at that curandera garden, but it was all over. You walked, I don't know how much you walked, but you did an excellent job. So thank you for doing that. And my last question, yeah, great, wonderful. My last question is, what are your plans for the next book? Can you give us an idea, a hint?
Absolutely. I very much enjoy writing, and I'm full of ideas, and I have already been doing some preliminary writing and researching for another book. And so I'm looking forward to working on that more. As I have time. I'm a multitasking person. I run an herb school and a nonprofit, and I'm also a mother. So there's a lot going on in my world, but writing is something I do really enjoy. And when I was writing this book, there were a lot of things that I wanted to elaborate on, but didn't have the space to do. Those of you who already have a copy of the book, you know, it's a little heavy, you know. You can do a little bit of pandemic weightlifting at home with that thing. Over time, the almost 2 pounds that it weighs does get heavy. So I had to stop. And so all the avenues that I felt could have and should have been elaborated on are things that I took note about, and will probably be part of the next book. And the biggest thing for me really was chapter 3, which is about reconnecting with landscapes. And in that chapter, I mentioned really only a few writers who have shown us ways to think about the world and help to create useful paradigms for understanding nature and humans and the connection between humanity and the rest of the living world. And I picked a few that were meaningful to me, but there were many other writers and many other perspectives that I really would like to explore more and present to the world, and show how these kinds of thinking and approaches to life and understanding nature can really enrich our lives, can make the life of everyone, and not just people, but, you know, plants and animals and living landscapes as well. I think of places as living entities whose life force is something I can feel. I talked about ecosystem empathy in that chapter, which is a concept of being able to feel the pulse of the land and to feel the vitality of the land, and not just the obvious stuff, but you know, the more subtle shifts that are taking place. And when we spend time in a place, we really can connect to that and see subtle differences taking place. And we can understand more clearly what our role in that is. And I think, especially with so much disheartening news about climate change and disruptive economic land uses and the consequences of those things, it's very easy for people to feel overwhelmed and disabled by this massive problem that the world is facing. And you know, as much as that kind of news as I read, I never lose hope, and I never feel discouraged, because I am uplifted by my relationship with the natural world, and it restores me and rejuvenates me and lifts my faith in humanity. And so I really want to write more about that, because I feel we really need to begin to see ourselves as parts of living ecosystems. And we can be very beneficial parts of ecosystems if we choose to do that. And we make the effort to do that by changing our land and water policies, changing our attitudes, and changing a lot of the things that we're doing. But there is a lot of hope in that, and there are a lot of positive avenues for us to become better stewards of the land and to protect the vitality of the land itself and to help bring that back. And a lot of writers out there have already presented perspectives and paradigms that I think are very useful for this. They may not be recently published, and people may have forgotten about them, or they may not have necessarily been put forth in a way that relates to what I'm talking about here, but I can see that connection. So I would like to write more about how we can see the land and plants as our relations, and how we can become better relations to them, and how that is not just work that we have to do. It's something that we put forth into the world that restores us and rejuvenates us as well, because of course we are deeply intertwined with all the rest of life. We can't go on seeing ourselves as something separate or something destructive. We have to begin to develop a healthy attitude that includes us in nature and helps us to realize our beneficial role in the world. And I think that is something I would really like to write a lot more about. And then of course, tying that to herbal practice, and not just medicinal herbs, but also I'm a wild food forager. So I like to give people practical information. And I think that my next book will also have a second section that would give people a lot of practical information, things like recipes and ways to work with plants that are fun, that are healthy, that will, again, continue to restore our connection to the natural world in a way that is really reciprocally beneficial for all of us.
Can't wait to read your next book, Dara. Excellent. Thank you so much. Amanda, it's all yours.
Okay, I'm gonna hop back in here. Hello, there I am. I love the spotlight feature. Okay, we have a few questions in the chat. The first one comes from Lori Nayland saying, are any plants included in the book endangered? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about any endangered or threatened plants that you might have included?
Well, that's a great question. You know, and it's a little bit tricky to answer because you know, sadly, we don't have adequate baseline data about many plant populations. And so it's hard to really accurately assess changes in plant populations over time. Many critical habitats don't even have recent botanical inventories or any inventories at all. And many plant species haven't been studied in a systematic long-term way to really give us the clarity that we need on that to answer that question. But certainly there are a lot of changes taking place, and plant populations are changing and shifting. And in New Mexico in particular, we live in a place where there is this kind of crossroads of different bioregions that meets right in the middle of New Mexico. And I write about this in the book, and I show maps in the book to help people to understand this. And, you know, think about the Sandia Mountains, for example. If you're local to this area, this, you know the Sandias, they're the mountains right on the east side of Albuquerque. And many of the plant species in the Sandia Mountains are literally on the edge of their range. And so as climate change unfolds, we can expect that plants that are on the edges of their natural ranges are going to be the first ones affected by that. And so that's something that I have observed in my own non-systematic way over the decades that I've been hiking in the same places. And so, you know, I have made these kinds of observations and seeing certain plant populations locally change. And that's something that I think I want to encourage everyone to do wherever you are, is if you are someone who loves hiking and walking in places, and you are doing that over long periods of time for many years, to make those observations so that you know what's happening locally in your area, and you can respond accordingly to that, because I think conservation issues need to be looked at on the local level. So that's kind of a general answer. And then, you know, just as one specific example of that, Yerba Mansa comes to mind, because that is a plant that you know, we don't have that data on, and we can't really see the changes in a quantifiable way. It's just based on casual observations of people like me and many other herbalists who have been keeping an eye on it. And then, you know, if we can go back and look at botanical surveys, the oldest ones that we can find, in the case of Yerba Mansa, there was a botanist named Watson who did surveys in Bernalillo County in the early 1900s. And so his observations are more than 100 years old. And when you look at what he's described in Bernalillo County, particularly in the Bosque, things have changed very dramatically in our plant communities in the Bosque during that time. And, you know, he describes, for example, vast expanses of Yerba Mansa turf, and many other authors too, who documented people's observations in ethnobotanical reports and things like that. Early travelers through the area have made similar observations. And although we can still see some locations like that, it is certainly not the way we would describe Yerba Mansa throughout its range. And Yerba Mansa is a plant that is relegated to wetland habitats in the desert Southwest. So if you want to think about what are the most endangered habitats in the world, wetlands in the desert are definitely going to be high on the list. And so without having the specific botanical data about that plant's population, we can put together all of the information we have, which is the loss of riparian habitat throughout the Southwest along the Colorado River and the Rio Grande. There's tremendous amounts of land loss, habitat loss, high levels of invasive non-native species becoming dominant throughout these areas. And when we put all of these things together, all of the information that we do have, it's easy to see that that plant's habitat is severely threatened, and also it's severely limited. And so these are the kind of nebulous answers that I give to questions like that, but they hopefully get people thinking about what they're observing when they walk in the places that they know.
That's so fascinating that there really isn't a system for tracking plants like there are endangered animals. Is that just because of their sheer abundance, or because there's a lack of interest or prioritizing plants when it comes to nature?
Well, I think it's both of those things. When it comes to conservation issues, it's much easier to pull on people's heartstrings when you see a polar bear clinging to a tiny piece of ice. That makes people very emotional.
Mhm.
When you talk about a plant struggling to survive, it just doesn't elicit the same response. I mean, honestly, most people can't name, very many plants in their everyday environment. Most people don't have any of that knowledge anymore. And so it's not something people even think about are plants. Why are plants even important? Most
Yeah,
people don't really even think about that or know why plants are important or why biodiversity in the botanical sense is important. We're not thinking every day like, we really need to have as much botanical biodiversity as possible in order to support animal biodiversity. Those things are linked. And of course,
absolutely.
biodiversity in general is linked to our own well-being, and plants are the foundation of that. So that's part of it. But then also just it takes a lot of work to do botanical surveys. You need a lot of people on the ground walking and doing plant transects. You need a lot of people who know species when they see them. And, a lot of universities don't even have botany programs. So, there's a lot of, I think, compounding problems that underlie this issue.
Mhm. All the more important to have books like this, right? To remind people how integral plants are to ecology. Without plants,
Yep.
we wouldn't even be here. Okay, so we've got Roberta Winchester saying, "Thank you for making me appreciate Siberian elms." I found that very interesting, your sort of embrace of the invasive species when they get such a bad rap. But you're saying those plants are important too. They're here. We need to appreciate them. We need to learn how to work with them. So that's a cool little comment there. Jen Hull, one of your fellow UNM Press authors. Hi there, Jen. She has a great question. I was thinking of this too, but she has articulated it better. How do settlers / colonizers like me approach ecology, land, and plant appreciation without appropriating, without appropriative colonization? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that is being increasingly discussed these days. And, I think a lot of people really have different views on this. So I'm very respectful of this dialogue in general. And it's something that I feel I have a lot to learn about. And so I am very open to listening when people are discussing this. And um, one of the things that I would say is going back to the non-native invasive species, they're colonizers of the botanical world, just like many people are colonizers in the human world. And, as someone whose ancestry goes back to Europe, I relate very easily to plants that are non-native because they are connecting me to my ancestors. And so I really encourage the use of non-native species, especially if you find an ancestral connection to them. Many of these non-native invasive trees and some of the other herbaceous plants like horehound and red clover, which I talk about in my book, are plants that I know my ancestors used. And I like connecting with them for their healing properties and their nutritive food uses. And I also feel it's a way of honoring where I'm from and who came before me, and a way of also remembering kind of the universal human experience. All of us have ancestors somewhere and corresponding plants that also now have migrated around the world. We live in a globalized community. And so, I obviously work with native plant species to this area because I live here and I am rooted here and I am part of this ecosystem, as I described earlier. But I also really honor those plants of my ancestral lineage. And I work with them in part being someone who is very aware of ecological changes, because I feel like I can help protect native plant populations here by working with non-native invasive species. And so, you know, I am always looking at things from an ecological perspective, but also a cultural perspective. And, you know, a lot of these non-native invasive species that we hate ecologically, you know, nobody wants to see Siberian elm or salt cedar displacing our cottonwoods, but they're here to stay. We really can't change that. And so how can we align with that? We can start harvesting them and eating them and making medicine out of them. That's one way.
Cheo, do you have anything to add about that cultural element? Being an expert in curanderismo, do you have any thoughts about cultural appropriation, how it relates to plant and herbal medicine?
We discussed a bit of that in our classes. My class deals with traditional plants of Mexico in the Southwest. Another class is global perspectives, which I bring African and Afro-Latino perspectives and plants from that area. I've had healers from Africa, from Cuba, from Puerto Rico. It's amazing that the similarities in plants, but one term that they keep using is these plants are for everyone. If this is not a cultural thing, I mean, everyone, if they can heal themselves, if they're medicinal plants, that's what's important. And the more that people understand the usage of these plants, the better. And and of course, we basically concentrate on medicinal plants. And many of these plants came from other countries. They're not even native of this country. When the Spaniards came to this world, they brought their seeds, their roots, and some were taken from here and to other countries. So it is an interesting topic, and it's something that has constantly been discussed and continues to be discussed in our classes.
Excellent. All right, Jen, I hope that answers your question. Seems both these authors are of the mindset that plants are for everyone. Tend to agree, and I think as long as we respect other cultures and especially the indigenous practices here in the Southwest of people that use plants, then I think we're okay. All right, we got Roberta Winchester. Her question is, do you think the city of Albuquerque is doing enough to encourage people to support and restore our local habitats? And could we encourage them to do more?
I think that's a great question too. You know, I think the city of Albuquerque really has some very cool programs that they've had in place for a long time. And I'd like to give them a shout out because, you know, we could always do more. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, the city of Albuquerque has been organizing school students and the community to plant cottonwood poles for, I don't even know how long. I, along with my children, have been participating in that program since my children were a baby and toddler, and they're now, one of them is about to go to college. So we have planted or helped to plant, I think 16 or 17 cottonwood stands in the Bosque through a City of Albuquerque open space program. They also do a lot of free educational programming, which I participate in and provide free programs for, but they have many other great speakers too, talking about all kinds of things from backyard habitat and restoration and eating your weeds and all this kind of stuff, protecting bees. And so I do feel that the City of Albuquerque, I'm more familiar with the open space division, but I feel that they do a lot. And you know, all of those kinds of agencies are restricted in their budget and personnel. And I know many of the people who work in that agency are really good people who really do care. And so I think they do a pretty good job. Of course, we could always do more. And that's why I started, for example, the Yerba Mansa project to mobilize citizens to support things and expand upon programs that already exist. And so we as citizens can add to those programs by participating in events like what the Yerba Mansa project offers.
Is there one place where people can sort of go and find resources or ways that they can help out? Or do you have some pet projects that you'd like to mention real quick if anyone out there would like to help with this effort?
Well, of course, the Yerba Mansa Project always needs lots of volunteers. So you can go to yerbamansaproject.org and find out what we're up to and sign up for our newsletter and join other events that we're doing. And then again, the City of Albuquerque Open Space has a lot of programs that you could go to their website as well. And Bernalillo County Open Space also has a lot of cool programs and projects. So those are the agencies that I'm most familiar with and would direct people to. And I know there are others too, which just aren't coming to mind right now, but I feel, Albuquerque as a community is just one of the coolest places to live because we have a lot of open space per capita that has already been protected, and the people here appreciate it and care about it and use it and want it to continue to exist in the healthiest manner it can. And so I think, we live in a fairly mobilized community of people who are willing to do their part on these projects.
Absolutely. And we are lucky that way. Okay, we've got Christiana. She says, you are so inspiring. I can't wait to read your book. Thank you. Casey Citrine, she says that your book is and your talk is reminding her of the book Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if you're familiar with that. One of our best-selling books right now. So wonderful. Let's see what else we've got. Casey has another question. Would it be worthwhile to do something in local and wild places at specific times of the year, like the Christmas bird count or annual bird count, but for plants? It collects data from lots of people and tries to get real-time local info on the presence of bird species. I don't know if that would work, but what you're talking about reminds me of what kind of info and crowdsourcing it would require, as well as raising awareness.
I think that's a great idea. And I would like somebody to organize a project like that. It does require, or it would require, I think, some training, because there are a lot more people who can recognize birds than can recognize plant species, I've learned. And so, like I said before, there's animals, I think, are easier for people to relate to and have generated more interest and more funding and all of that over the years. And so I think it's a great idea, and I would love to see something like that started, and there's an iNaturalist platform already out there that could be used possibly as a tool to facilitate that. So it's a fabulous idea.